Hi everyone, I'm Hui Xian, and I'm currently a Data Science and Operations Research Advisor at FedEx Express. Today, I'll be sharing with you about the SmartBFA project. So SmartBFA stands for Smart Mobility and Accessibility for Barrier-Free Access. It is a collaboration between Trampoline, a non-profit organization, and the Singapore Management University. In this talk, I want to focus on our motivation behind SmartBFA and our experiences with crowdsourcing barrier-free access information over a 2-year period between 2018 and 2019. So most of us use Google Maps on a daily basis, regardless of whether we want to find new routes using driving or by public transportation. It's become so ingrained in our daily lives that we can hardly imagine finding our way to a new cafe, to visit friends, or for out-of-office meetings without first checking on the route using Google Maps. However, what most of us actually don't realize is that there is currently no Google Maps equivalent for wheelchair users in Singapore. Unlike able-bodied persons, wheelchair users will find it quite challenging to traverse over paths with small steps or steep slopes. This is a significant problem because as of 2014, we have approximately 100,000 wheelchair users in Singapore, and we expect this number to increase in tandem with our aging population. Furthermore, a wheelchair user may take up to 10 times longer to travel to the same destination as compared to able-bodied persons. As such, wheelchair users are very disadvantaged because they have to think twice when they are looking for jobs or when they are choosing to socialize with their friends, because they have to find out beforehand if the place that they are going to is accessible or not. This inaccessibility affects opportunities, decisions, and confidence of wheelchair users when they are going out. As such, SmartBFA has the following 3 project objectives. Firstly, we want a way to collect barrier-free access routes in a scalable and sustainable manner. Secondly, we want to have an up-to-date navigational platform that provides information about wheelchair accessible paths. You can think of this as Google Maps navigation for wheelchair access. Finally, we want to ensure that SmartBFA is a one-stop portal. This means that wheelchair users shouldn't need to use one app for finding, let's say, bus arrival timings, and then yet another app for wheelchair-friendly, barrier-free access. This is a simplified overview of how we find barrier-free access paths using crowdsourced sensor data from wheelchair volunteers. First, we retrofit sensors such as GPS and IMU on the wheelchairs of participants. The IMU, which stands for Inertial Measurement Unit, is a 9-axis sensor providing accelerometer, gyroscope, and magnetometer readings. The GPS allows us to identify the outdoor locations at which the sensor readings are being captured. The sensor data is then analyzed offline in batches to determine the road conditions. Finally, we provide wheelchair-friendly paths to users by color-coding the road conditions using a bumpiness metric that we have designed. And this information is being provided to wheelchair users via an app. This is our simplified system architecture. So firstly, the sensor readings that we collect from the IoT devices are being published to our broker at the backend server. The readings are stored in a Postgres database, and we also have a data pipeline for processing the data. We have system monitoring and alerts in place so that we can take timely action whenever any component of the system is down. And the analyzed data can be used for town planning by our urban planners, as well as navigation by wheelchair users and the caregivers. I'll now take you through some of the design considerations that we had in mind when we were selecting our hardware. The device needs to have a long battery life and be easy to recharge because we are actually depending on our wheelchair volunteers to help us to recharge the device. It needs to have a small form factor so that we can easily install it on the wheelchairs. We also need to be able to store the sensor data on the device so that data is cached and uploaded only when there is Wi-Fi access. In terms of sensors, we need GPS models with reasonably accurate location information. We also require sensors that provide good measures of the road bumpiness as well as incline. In addition, we decided to use custom IoT devices for this phase of the project so that we do not have to deal with issues resulting from the use of heterogeneous commodity smartphones. Throughout the course of this project, we have evolved our hardware across 3 iterations. So in version 1, we used the Raspberry 3B Plus, a GPS sensor that we bought off Lazada, the ADXL 345 accelerometer, and a real-time clock. In version 2, we swapped out the 3-axis accelerometer for the 9-axis Adafruit IMU sensor, which provides us with additional gyroscope readings that we can use to detect incline. Finally, in version 3, we swapped out the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus for the smaller RPi Zero wireless. We also used the Berry GPS IMU, which has the GPS and IMU integrated together for a smaller form factor. A Bluetooth beacon was also placed in the volunteers' homes so that the IoT device stops collecting data when the volunteer is at home. On average, each wheelchair volunteer collects data for us for about 8 weeks each. This allows us to maximize spatial coverage while reducing volunteer fatigue. As it was costly for the data to be sent continuously via 3G, we decided to cache the sensor readings on the device and auto-upload it only when Wi-Fi is detected. We also conducted surveys with our wheelchair volunteers so that we can better understand the travel patterns as well as preferences. So on the right side of this slide, you can see a photo of our IoT device that is actually being installed on the wheelchairs of one of our volunteers. Since this is a largely unmanaged IoT system, we definitely had to use system monitoring to help us with robust data collection. We trigger alerts to the research team via Slack whenever there is any partially missing sensor data, such as GPS or IMU readings. We also trigger alerts when no data has been received from the IoT device for 4 consecutive days. There could be a few reasons why this happens. For example, it could be that the volunteer did not go out of their homes at all, either because it was a rainy day or because they were not feeling well. It could also be that the volunteer had forgotten to recharge the device, or the last reason could be that the sensor device was faulty. So after 4 consecutive days, we would actually call the volunteer to find out what has been happening on the ground. We obviously also faced several challenges during our data analysis. To elevate the issue of GPS inaccuracy, we had to use a combination of various techniques such as denoising using filtering and also machine learning models. And we also removed stationary points using clustering. In terms of feature extraction, we had to use techniques such as Fourier transform to calculate our bumpiness metric. Although we had custom IoT devices, we still had to cater for heterogeneous wheelchair types because the placement of each IoT device on the wheelchair was unique, depending on the make and model of the wheelchair. We fused the sensor data together from various wheelchair volunteers to provide road condition information and gave higher weights to data that was collected more recently. Finally, we also used probabilistic matching of GPS points to OpenStreetMap data so that we could infer the entire path of the wheelchair user. This is an overview of our data pipeline, which I will not be going through in detail, but you can take a look later on if you want more details. So what I would really like to do next is to actually bring you through some of the analytical work that we did. So we validated our algorithms through control experiments around SMU. So here on the left-hand side, you would see a path that goes around certain parts of SMU. And the figure on the right, this one, is actually the power density of the accelerometer readings. The parts of the data of the graph marked 1, 2, 3, and 4 correspond to the areas on the map that are marked 1, 2, 3, and 4. So as you can see, 1, 2, and 3 have higher values for the power density and therefore reflect areas that are less accessible. Number 4 has a lower power density and therefore reflects an area where the path is actually more accessible. So in the next couple of slides, I will show you the photos of what it looks like on the ground. So number 1 is actually a steep descent, which is a path from the pavement leading to a pedestrian crossing. So this is the pedestrian crossing, and this is actually a slope. Number 2 is a cobbled pathway outside the Singapore Art Museum. So such cobbled pathways can actually be slightly painful for wheelchair users who have spinal cord injuries. Number 3 is also a cobbled pathway. Actually, the tactile pavings that you see here are for our visually impaired friends, but they are slightly bumpy and uncomfortable for our wheelchair-bound friends. So to be very honest, it is not easy to have a universal inclusive design across all the disability groups. And number 4, which has a low power density, is a smooth pathway that is considered to be wheelchair friendly. So in addition to our control experiments around SMU, we also performed some preliminary ground truth validation using the data that was collected from our wheelchair users as they went about their daily commute. The map on the left shows a snapshot of the area around Bukit Panjang that has been color-coded. So red lines means that the path is bumpy, orange means slightly less bumpy, green line means wheelchair-friendly, and teal colored ones, for example here, means that we currently do not have sufficient data to make a good estimate of the road surface condition. So on the map, we have identified a short segment of the path that is colored in red, indicating wheelchair inaccessibility. So when we went down to that actual area to investigate, we realized that the red line corresponds to a small road over here that is leading to the car park entrance. So the wheelchair users would have to cross the road over here. So the sensor readings do in fact reflect the actual surface conditions, which is bumpy for the wheelchair user. So this view of the map here shows the data coverage as well as color-coded paths that have been traversed by the wheelchair users. And the color coding is according to whether the road condition is good, it's a mix of good and bad, as bad, or that we have insufficient data. So we also have a confidence level that indicates the reliability of the information about the road bumpiness index. And this confidence is a factor of the amount of data collected at a particular point, as well as the GPS inaccuracy reported by the sensor. So to summarize, SmartBFA has 2 key impact areas. Firstly and foremost, we want our wheelchair friends to feel empowered with independent mobility. Secondly, we want to provide evidence-based urban planning and improvements through our crowdsourced sensor data. In the last section of this talk, I would like to share more about the lessons learned from this project. So as Randy Pausch, a famous CMU professor, once said, experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted. So as many of you might have noticed, our spatial coverage is actually limited by where wheelchair users travel. In the next phase of this project, we hope to be able to integrate the data collected from other sources, including data that is being collected by able-bodied volunteers using their own smartphones. Next, the utility of our map is actually dependent on the accuracy of the surface condition analysis as well as its tag location. Third, the point-to-point barrier-free accessibility requires cooperation from both the public and private entities, so we can't do this alone. Finally, the scalability and sustainability of SmartBFA requires implicit incentives and devices for participation from wheelchair volunteers. We think this is possible if the wheelchair users derive utility from the SmartBFA app, in the same way that we also derive utility from Google Maps, while also contributing data back to them. Finally, we are really very grateful to ToteBoard for funding this project and to also SG Enable for supporting this project via the ToteBoard's Enabling Lives Initiative grant. And this is our project team. Thank you very much.